chill. Right on my side is my ego becomes a funky child with some words on my tongue. Be like in, take a breath in my
Hello
mouth.
and welcome to MattElamUniversity.com. This is your host, Matt Elam. Today we're talking about an extremely interesting topic, for me anyway, and the topic is the P90X fitness and muscle building system versus the Soviet-style training methodology. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with what the term Soviet means, the Soviet Union was a band of over 15 countries that centered around Russia that basically dominated the Olympic sports for well over 3 or 4 decades. And the reason is partly because of their training methods, and also because when you stack 14, 15 countries together and you pick the cream of the crop athletes, you're going to have a pretty good run. But a lot of their methodologies is what we use in the West today. So the Soviet methodology was extremely effective, however, not as effective as some training models that we'll talk about later on, but not in this particular show. Today we're looking at the comparison between the P90X, Tony Horton's fitness muscle building system, and Soviet training. Now, let's look at the premise of both. The P90X training, the whole premise of the P90X is muscle confusion. Now, according to Tony Horton, muscle confusion, or his brand of muscle confusion, is when you put the body through certain mechanical sequences that it is unfamiliar with. And as soon as the body develops a familiarity to that motor sequence, you change it up, thus confusing the muscle and putting it under constant stress. Now, the yield of that, or the theoretical yield of that, is when you're constantly stressing the body and the body does not know what's coming next. It's always going to be on high alert, and you're always going to have a higher rate of contraction, and you're going to also have a higher rate of mental stimulation. And so that's the premise of the P90X. Also, when you look at the frequency and duration of it, it's basically 4-week chunks. You're going to go 3 weeks of muscle confusion, and you're going to go 1 week of what it's their form of restoration. In my training model, I call it restoration. They call it recovery. And you're basically doing things that don't involve heavy external resistance. So they're not using their dumbbells, and they're not doing heavy pulling and whatnot. They're doing more body weight things. They're doing more what they call core and core synergistic type training, and they unload a little bit, and then they follow that up with 2 more mesocycles of 3 weeks, 1 off, 3 weeks, 1 off. And that's the premise of the P90X. Now, the premise of the old Soviet-style training method lasted 1 mesocycle lasting 1 month. So basically, athletes from all 14, 15 nations would get together, and they would have literally a brutal 1-month training session, and then they would go home to the respective countries and recover. So if you look at the model, if you break the P90X into thirds, and you look at 3 weeks hard, 1 off, and you look at the model that the former Soviet Union used, the standard Soviet training model, it was also 1 month. It might have been 3 weeks and 1 off, but it was probably 4 hard weeks. So either way, they're very similar in their structure when you look at 3 or 4 weeks of hard training, and then you rest the body a little bit. And during that time, you're going to create some muscle confusion because, let's face it, athletes, let's look at the Soviet Union model or the Soviet training model. Athletes come from different countries. There's different cultural norms that infuse that country. There's different types of work ethic. But when they all get together, they're all subject to a uniform training system. So some may pick it up and it might be easier on others' neuromuscular systems, while others might find it more taxing. So either way, there is a bit of muscle confusion going on there, even if the Soviet training model's method was not designed to do that. It might have been progressive in nature. Let's say, for example, week 1, let's just use a bench press, for example. 135 was the weight used for that week. Then the second week was 145. Then the third week it was 155. Then the fourth week is 165. Well, that is a little more standard progressive model than the P90X. The P90X is, isolate body parts, more of a bodybuilding type routine where you've got back and biceps, and you do shoulders and chest on different days, and you work your legs, and there's plyometric days. It confuses the body. But as far as the time duration is concerned, it is roughly the same, 3 weeks, 1 off, and about a month for both.